So let's just jump right into it because we know time is money, honey. Time is money, especially when it comes to the black box. I will start off my first question. We're going to start with the right to explanation and what meaningful means right here. So I would like to direct this first question to Simon. Simon, my question to you is, and you can, of course, everyone else can also add on to, many modern models operate as opaque, black boxes. Do citizens have a right to explanation for AI-driven decisions?
No.
No.
So it's a good question, but I'll break it into two parts. So why are they opaque? Why is it a black box? And why do we care? And I won't go into detail on the why it's opaque. I think people understand now that AI systems are incredibly complicated, dealing with billions or more variables in multiple dimensions. It's actually not just hard for a computer scientist to understand, it's hard for any human to understand. And even the people developing these models, Sam Altman will confess, he doesn't know how ChatGPT does many of the things that it does. So they're inherently opaque. It's a feature, not a bug. And an important thing to understand in this context is that explanations are not free. They cost, either in terms of money and time, or they cost in terms of accuracy. Okay, so why do we care about opacity? Well, sometimes we do have a right. It's not like in Europe there is this right to an explanation. We could talk about that if you're really keen. But basically, I would say you generally want to understand, you, society, want to understand how a decision is made in three broad types of circumstances. The first is to avoid inferior decisions. I think we're all familiar that if we make a decision without doing our work, without thinking it through, without talking with experts, we make bad decisions. And sometimes these models make bad decisions if they're not trained properly. So we want to be able to make sure they're making better decisions. Secondly, there are some decisions that are either impermissible or illegal if they're biased, if they're based on information that shouldn't have been included. That's a second type of question. And so in those situations, if you are denied something on impermissible grounds, or there's some reasonable basis for thinking you were discriminated against, then yeah, you might want some kind of explanation. And then thirdly, and I think most interestingly maybe to this group, is there are some decisions that are illegitimate if they're not made by someone who is responsible for making that decision. So I come from a legal background. If a judge sentences you to prison or says that one party gets custody of a child and then is asked, so why did you make that decision? And the judge says, I don't know, the AI told me. That's not good enough. He or she needs to make that decision themselves. And so there are some decisions that really just have to be made by a human. And in that circumstance, outsourcing it to a black box isn't just illegitimate, it's in many circumstances going to be illegal.
Very well said. Does anyone have to add to that? Do you all agree with him right there? Russell? Ren Yeong?
Yeah, I agree with Simon. There is an expectation that we have, particularly with AI, that we deserve or merit a explanation when that just may not be technically feasible in some cases. And I think that there's this unique requirement that we have to have it with AI, but we don't have it with many other parts of society as is. There's a lot of things that we utilize right now that you don't have an explanation as to why it works, but you do have an understanding of the outcomes, and they have safety measures related to that. Tylenol is a great example, or acetaminophen. We do not know precisely how it works and why it works. There is a lot of chemistry and chemical issues related to that. But what we do know is when to deploy it, when it can be used properly and safely, and the particular issues related to that. So there's a variety of issues within society right now, or use cases of where we have things that we just cannot explain, but we know proper usage of them and the safety related to that. But what do I think that people do deserve? They deserve transparency, and that's different from explainability. They deserve to know to some extent what is going into these models and how they're being built. And I think that is an important requirement, and we see transparency actually going down. We just at Stanford HAI, we just published our AI index less than 2 weeks ago. Data shows that it is consistently going down in terms of transparency. And a lack of transparency removes stakeholders from the process. we can become, if there's more transparency, people can participate in the process more about this. So I think there's a unique difference between explainability versus transparency. I believe we deserve more transparency.
Actually,
Oh, go ahead.
okay. Actually, I was just going to push on that point a little bit more just to make this conversation a bit more spicy. So it's not just transparency, I'd say, Russell, it's also how transparency is being portrayed. So for example, if you say that, deploying a system causes 23% like a default risk in approval of loans, that could actually decrease trust rather than increase trust. So if the first principles perspective is to increase trust, then how we portray transparency is also important. I.e., does increased transparency lead to a certain decision? Or is it a certain threshold, for example? So when I sort of then say that this decision comes with a certain level of transparency, I'm really saying that maybe it's not just 23% probably of default, but it's within certain critical thresholds, and beyond the certain threshold, a decision will be deferred, for example. So then that conveys trust. That's a perspective on transparency.
Yeah, I think unfortunately you have a very aligned panel up here. It makes for a very uninteresting conversation as a side effect, because I think we're all... my opinion is very much, like we can overfixate on model explainability all day, but that is actually not the thing that is most important. It's transparency of the system, transparency and governance of the system that the model lives within. A good example of this, I think like the Tylenol example is a really good example. We may not understand the mechanisms of the drug, but we understand remediation if something goes wrong. We know who to call. We know how to get an outcome. We know how to apply pressure to the system overall to remediate something if something kind of goes off, takes a left when it should have taken a right. Aviation is a good example of this, right? We cannot interpret what is happening in the brain of a pilot all the time, right? We trust that there's systems in place. There's mechanical systems, there's electronic systems, there are checklists, there's procedure. There are all these things that we can reason about, and that builds our trust in this very complex system, and it's not all contingent on this one single black box element in it. So I think like it's an inevitability that these models are going to continue to get more and more black boxy. They're going to get more and more sophisticated, and really that puts the onus on the systems around them to sort of be sophisticated measures of governance.
We talk about transparency and explainability. Russell, you mentioned, what could we do to augment or increase transparency so citizens or individuals won't need to have any explainability in terms of, let's say, the implementation of AI right now? What do you think we could do to...
I think there's a variety of things that we can do. You'll always find me coming from academia to be very much for an open source community. I think that makes a huge difference, but nevertheless, that's not always necessarily available to us. I think one important thing that we've talked about a little bit within Stanford is adverse incident reporting would be one important thing that we don't see enough of, and we're seeing voluntary reporting on incidents rise. You're going to see incidents rise over time because people are deploying these models more in their daily life no matter what. But aviation was just brought up, and I think that's a perfect example. Within the United States, there's National Transportation Safety Board. If one little thing goes wrong on a plane, it is recorded, and it can be something fairly innocuous, like a light going out in the cockpit, and they see a trend, and maybe it's an issue related to fuse. But it could also be a plane, like a couple years ago, an Alaska Airlines jet that had a door pop off midair. And they grounded them, and they were able to go in through and check and see that all of these planes had screws loose on them that needed a better proper tightening related to them. That is a different form of transparency that can actually help, and that could be infrastructure from a government that can help create that and create a baseline level of requirements that are collected through this, and we're able to more effectively mitigate for when there are problems that can happen. Right now, there's nothing that really truly exists in a way to be able to capture this data and to be able to have repositories related to this so that we can actually see when a model may go awry. Is this just kind of a deviation that may have unfortunately happened, or is it because that there's an actual trend and there's a particular area and we can mitigate and fix for that?
And many of the model developers would actively resist any kind of transparency along those lines.
That makes it very difficult, I think, for the transparency, right? I think when, obviously, if it's more transparent, there would be less of a need for a right of explanation. do you foresee any type of a scenario where maybe there should be a right for an explanation in some use case or in some scenario where maybe it is I think, legitimized to have one?
Yeah, so having touched on the Europeans, I mean, the one thing the Europeans, I think, have done interestingly is have this sort of escalating framework. And basically, the short version is the more seriously something affects your rights and obligations, the more likely it is that you have both an interest and perhaps, in some circumstances, a right to know more about it. So if it's your taxes being calculated, okay, you'll have a very basic right to understanding how that's happening, but not necessarily the policy reasons behind it. If it's, again, a legal case, then the judge needs to give reasons, otherwise that can go on appeal. But the larger problem we're going to face is, and I think Russell touched on this, these decisions are going to proliferate. So there are going to be countless, limitless decisions being made about you by systems that you will be unaware of. So I think one problem with the right to explanation, in particular as the Europeans have framed it, is that's often understood as the right to contest a decision you didn't like. And that presumes that one, you know there was a decision, and two, you're only complaining about it because you didn't get what you wanted, and three, you have the ability to challenge it. But if AI decisions are being made about you all the time, you won't know about most of them, and many of them might be innocuous. But those that are not, you also might not know that had you been given a little bit more transparency about the overall architecture, you might have wanted to challenge them if you had the ability.
So I think Sami, you talk about severity and contestability. I think one more perspective is reversibility. If the decision can be reversed, then obviously the right to transparency will also be different as well. Otherwise, lawyers get a lot of work. Otherwise.
They're going to do all that work though too. But I guess right now, along that line, could you just share, one of you share your view on, I guess, AI assurance and ethics now? Obviously, we're talking about, it's very, very opaque now between explainability and also with transparency. What would be your view, I think, on AI assurance and ethics then? Is there any ethics involved in if we don't need the right to explain pretty much anything?
AI assurance, we have 3 hours, do we? I'll try and boil it down to a minute. So I like to distinguish between law, ethics, governance, and assurance. So law is what you must do if you don't want to go to prison. Ethics is what you should do if you want to go to heaven. Governance is how you track the decisions you're making, and then assurance is how you measure whether you are complying with the law and/or ethics, and if you're following your proper procedure in governance. So Singapore has recently latched onto assurance as linked with AI Verify, the verification, and I think it's a good approach because it operationalizes something that's often very theoretical. I mean, many companies say, oh, we're ethical without really intending to follow through. Ethics, you can tell how serious they are, whether ethics is located in the kind of marketing department or if it's more in the compliance department. And we really want to nudge it towards compliance. And one way to do that is measuring it. The problem is, as you, Alan, kind of allude, this is a pretty woolly area. It's not quite like data protection and privacy, which is reasonably well defined. Ethics, to the extent that it moves away from law, has this sort of woolliness associated with it. So one of the first things Singapore did with AI Verify is give companies a tool through AI Verify saying, okay, whatever you say your ethics are, here's a tool to help you measure that. And that hopefully is the start of one, understanding behavior, and two, improving it.
If I can chime in there.
Absolutely.
I worked on translating the governance framework into a testing framework, and then our company worked on the testing tool. It's a great start, but I have to say there's still so much more to go in bridging. And in fact, I would say we have to bring governance and ethics into the engineering process, right? Because at the end of the day, the people who are building, training, fine-tuning, improving our models are the engineers. And we have to equip them with the means to figure out, okay, if I want it to be more fair, more transparent, how does this actually change my day-to-day? Why is that important? Because I think when we talk about explainability or transparency, actually at the heart of it, what we want is better confidence in the way AI is being used, right? And sometimes explainability becomes a misnomer because what is explainable to me is not necessarily explainable to you. And we know this from firsthand because our customers come to us and say, hey, can you please help us to test? And we need to help our bosses understand explainability. And our technical team will do it, and out comes this very detailed report on the trade-offs between metrics, and they look at it, they're like, no, this is not explainability, right? And the data scientist goes, no, this is explainability. Like if you read what Stanford says, it's explainability. And then we realize that actually at the heart of it, it's articulating the decision boundaries of the way you have defined the use of AI, how you've built it, and the extent to which you know the long tail of risk.
Well
Can I
said.
build on what April was talking about? I think one important thing that she just referenced is confidence. And it's confidence in the systems that we're integrating into our lives. We just, again, got done with this report, and it's nearly 500 pages, but this last chapter is one of the most fascinating ones because it's on public opinion, and it measures global public opinion. And one number stands out to me significantly, or two numbers actually, 81% and 31%. In Singapore, Singaporeans have an 81% favorable rating towards their government regulating or managing AI appropriately. And in the United States, it's the lowest at 31%. And that is really important because it will define how the technology is integrated into society when we have not just trust and confidence in the systems, but we have trust and confidence in the governing of the systems. And right now, the US just is at the floor and Singapore is at the top of this. And I think what's unique about Singapore, and I always love coming here, is this is one of the best test use cases environments because it's a small, flexible country that can do a lot, needs to rely on the technology because of certain limitations. And yet there is an openness towards it, but there's also a government that is working towards aligning with their people to be able to effectively do this. So I think that is a really key part of confidence. Goes beyond just the systems, it goes within the governments looking into integrating the systems and how they're doing it on behalf of their people.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, I think trust is absolutely the key here. And producing the explanations, there's an infinite number of ways you can produce explanations of what a model is doing, right? You've got the mech interp crowd, like peeling back the layers, counting neuron activations and saying like, because these neurons fired, this model was thinking about X, Y, and Z. There's that. Then there's the, latent space folks, the folks who kind of like do high dimensional geometry and topology and things like that. But the moment you produce those explanations, you need someone on the other end who can actually interpret those explanations, right? And sufficiently detailed explanations become inscrutable to folks who haven't studied this for many, many years and are deeply understand the math. So at some point, it stops being about explanation and more about the assurances you have around the system. Do we have remediation paths? Am I shown counterfactuals, as an example? Like if I can probe the system and I say, here's the outcome that I got based on this input. If I change that input in these ways, what needs to be true for me to get a different output, right? Like I can then, as an individual, understand kind of like the levers, if you will. And that's not something that is always captured in the right ways and just pure model interpretability, but is something that needs to be there for the systems built around these models, the harnesses, if you will.
Yeah, and maybe just to follow on from that very quickly, so that's true on an individual basis. But as I said earlier, explanations come at a cost. And so if you think of institutions or people that you trust, it's unlikely that you only trust people or institutions where you have full visibility of all of their activities, all of their transactions. Most spouses don't sort of share all their passwords. You trust them because you get to know them, because you have a track record, you have a relationship. And so explanation is a microcosm, but trust is more than just, trust is helped by explanations, but as it's built up, then that actually becomes part of the relationship. And that's linked with one other interesting thing from the Stanford AI index that came out, is that along with trust comes optimism. And optimism is key, together with trust, to adoption and hopefully, in Singapore's context, economic benefits and so on.
There's a correlation, there's a correlation between the optimism side and the trust side. And that indeed Singapore has much more optimism towards AI than the US does, and this correlates to their trust in government as well related to it.
I was going to say, trust is also not just optimism, but also confidence in the sort of like, because I guess confidence drops when it's higher uncertainty, and lower trust is caused when uncertainty goes up. So essentially, what is really important in deploying AI system is three things: monitoring, evaluation, as well as audit trails. So if you're able to audit, like, in the case of the airplane, what has happened in flight, that really does increase trust over time, and knowing why a decision was made, who made it, input, output, as well as ability to remediate, as what Shayan said, is really important. And when you deploy AI, when you deploy in enterprises, only 34% of enterprises have really deployed AI for where it matters, right? There's various statistics on a lot of demos, not a lot of things really in production. And that's the issue of we've not really solved the problem of really deploying AI with full observability as well as evaluation harness. And we chatted about this earlier as well. And that I think is really important in imbuing trust when you deploy AI within an enterprise.
We talk about trust right here. I have a question from our audience. If those human qualities like trust, transparency, and fidelity are so hard to quantify and measure, how can we realistically embed and reflect them in AI systems?
Well, a quick first response. I mean, we're being a little bit tough on AI, which is fine. That's the purpose of this panel. But one good thing about AI is if you interrogate it, if you ask, are you biased, for example, AI normally, there are some exceptions, but AI will normally try to tell you the truth. Good luck asking a human. Good luck asking a person, oh yeah, sorry, I'm sexist, I'm racist, whatever. People are well known to say things like, I'm the least racist person in this room, says a famous American, not you, Russell. So it's challenging, but at least if there is data there are mechanisms available. And Rosaro is one example of a company that's trying to come up with those kind of metrics to actually evaluate them and help improve behavior.
Yeah, I'm sorry, do you want to go ahead? I was just going to quickly tack onto that. I mean, the academic research world in evals, interpretability, etc., continues to try and solve this problem. There's no silver bullet. There's a whole lot of primitives that exist. The nice thing is that at a fundamental level, AI is just like a program, right? You can treat it like a program. You have version control of these models. You know that between model version A and B, there's not going to be a change. These are snapshotted. You have systems in place that you can rely on because we need them to deploy production level software. So the side effect is we have many ways by which we can interrogate these models, should it be important that we do so. And I think, that itself is a fundamental question. Should we, in what cases is it required? In what cases do we have the obligation? In what cases is it a good idea? And in what cases is it not a good idea? To Simon's point, there's cost associated with all of this, but we do have tools to be able to do this. And we have tools that we simply don't in the case of humans.
Yeah, I wanted to say that the key word in this question, I think, is fidelity, right? Often we have very grand ambitions for AI, and rightly so. But the reality is today, if you do want to measure AI against human qualities, it's very important to define what you expect from the AI. In defense and security context, we often talk about ODD, right? The operational design domain, or in EU AI Act, it's mentioned as the context of use. Similarly, if you were to hire an employee today, you would have a job description for him or her. And with that job description, then there are different ways to test the AI. For us, we spend a lot of time on what we call the golden test set. It basically articulates the scope, right, of what you expect the AI to do, not just in terms of what it should perform, but how it might fail. And I mentioned earlier that very, very long tail of risk and edge cases that you might not immediately see, but in high-risk situations, you would want to validate. And so the question is really the fidelity of that AI performance and safety against this context of use that really matters.
I'm going to say something that's a little probably unpopular in a sense, but I think it's important to also ask ourselves, why are we building these systems in the first place? And I think that we should always be striving towards better trust, towards better explainability, and as I mentioned earlier, really doubling down more on transparency. But at the same time, these technologies can and have a means to be able to make a huge difference in people's lives. And we're talking about imperfect systems, but we also have an imperfect world. A good example of this is in the United States. There are so many people who do not have access towards legal services. They are trapped in a situation that does not benefit them in any situation. They may be a debt collector who's coming after them and they're forced to settle. They may be in a custody dispute and they cannot afford a lawyer to help them in this space. We have to be very careful to remember the difference of when we were building these technologies aren't to do the super amazing things, but also to democratize what a lot of us enjoy probably in this room and have a means of access to, and that is towards basic things that are easier for us to come by. This technology can democratize and make things different for people, and it is today. We should still do everything we can to make it a more perfect system, but society's not perfect. It is imperfect, and we must be able to consistently adjust. But remember that this technology can make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And so to that end, I do lean on the techno-optimist side, but putting in the necessary guardrails and being able to do what we can to make it as effective and useful for everyone. But remembering that there are people who this technology today is making a difference in their lives.
Yeah, one can make similar arguments about mental health. I mean, there are tens
Correct.
of millions of people in the world who would benefit from meeting a counselor who will never meet a counselor. Is AI-assisted mental health unproblematic? No, there are examples of suicides following engagement with a chatbot. But does it help tens of millions of people? Potentially. I just want to flip, though, onto the other side of trust. One of the hardest parts of AI governance is not actually the machines, it's the people. And understanding in what circumstances humans will responsibly engage with AI is actually a huge problem. Just think of autonomous vehicles. If the road was only autonomous vehicles, it would be easy. But getting autonomous vehicles to interact with crazy pedestrians, with animals and so on is really hard. But it's also really telling that, and San Francisco is a good microcosm of this, the first time you get in a truly autonomous vehicle is really uncertain. You take pictures, you're very nervous, and then the third or fourth time is very simple. And now I know people who live in San Francisco who would never send their kids in a car with an actual driver. They would only send them with a Waymo with no driver. And so this is one of the other things we need to understand, particularly in the public sector, is not just focusing on the machines, but focusing on the users who will do random weird things and often be quite unpredictable and perhaps less predictable than the machines themselves.
But the end goal, ultimate goal, is to strive towards a so-called perfect system when it comes to AI. One of our questions here that I want to pose to everyone here is, in the event that AI does make a mistake, who should get fired? The engineer? The manager? I guess the algorithm? I guess you can't really fire the algorithm, but who takes the blame for it? Who would take the blame?
So I like
Simon wrote a book on this.
So I like to tell any organization that's thinking of using generative AI in particular, by all means use it, but you've got to think of it as a very smart intern with a drinking problem. And all three parts of that are important. Very smart, can do amazing things, but they're an intern. You can't blame the AI. There's no circumstance in which you could say the AI did it. And the drinking problem is the hallucinations making random decisions. So the key question, is who should be responsible? And there's a whole working group at the moment on agentic AI in particular, which we can talk about. But basically, there are sort of three obvious candidates. There's the developer, the sort of Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, and so on, who could be held responsible, and they don't want to be responsible if they can avoid it. There's the deployer, the entity, the company that sort of put it into a usable system. And if you use generative AI in particular, you'll see at the bottom of ChatGPT, there's a little disclaimer that makes it clear that they're all disclaiming responsibility and it's on you. Users should check themselves. And I do think there is a risk that we go down the path of data protection, where in personal data protection, I mean, I like to do this every now and then, I can see most of the audience. How many of you have clicked, I accept terms and conditions in the last 6 months on some sort of online system? Okay, keep your hand up if you read all of those terms and conditions. I write books on this, I don't bother reading it. But that is a contractual basis for saying you are accepting responsibility for the use of your personal data, and there is a risk we're doing the same thing with AI, that we are accepting responsibility and that we're meant to verify these things, which, as we said earlier, are often opaque and impossible for us to understand. But legally, the responsibility is falling on us. And at the moment, that's where your safest bet is to say that whoever made the decision to follow the AI's advice, the decision rests with them.
I actually am very fascinated by this question because one particular issue here that I remember in a conversation with one of my colleagues at Stanford Medical, a professor in the medical school, was the ambiguity that lies around this actually creates more problems. And if we had better understanding and confidence as to who does hold the liability, it would be significantly different. And what he referenced to me was essentially if 100 people die from X disease, rare disease, and there's an AI system that could save 70 of them, but 30 of those that died, of the 30 that died, 5 of them died as a direct harm from the AI system. The lack of understanding of who is liable meant that medical providers would just say then 100 people are going to die, because there's no confidence for them as to where the lines are. So we need to get to a system of law and torts that are going to be able to provide that clarity for a lot of people so that they can actually understand where and how we apply this. It is still ambiguous and it's very unclear right now.
I think there's also the dimension of professional integrity. So in the spaces that we're in, like health, defense, security, what we're seeing is at the end of the day, the operational decision maker, right, the doctor, or as you heard earlier from Daniel, the firefighter, they are still the ones ultimately who needs to own the decision they make with the AI. And I'm sure eventually with the law and insurance and societal expectations and all that, the accountability can get clearer. But I personally also do think that in the professional context, that human being that is making the decision that has an impact on the human life does have to own a high degree of accountability. And by the way, I didn't tell you this, but when you were interviewed and you said that the AI is like an intern who is drunk, the reporter then asked me, so April, what do you think of that? And my immediate thought in my head was, oh, then Rosario is the Alcoholic Anonymous.
All right. Okay, now on that note, yeah, very, very good. Okay. Keep on.
You're all looking forward to drinks after this final panel, right?
Yeah, exactly. Drink before you think. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so we actually have quite a few individuals in the audience that would love to hear the panel's view on, I guess now, the governance models for the application of AI to a higher risk human-centered use cases, such as healthcare, social services, sector agnostic, specific, hybrid. So what would be your, I guess, view on how to govern these models, for the application of AI?
I mean, I can kick it off. So in these types of environments, it's always very complex. So I'm going to hand wave several things. I think to Russell's point earlier, there needs to be kind of a chain of accountability that needs to exist. We don't have it yet, right? So there's a whole kind of like legal backstop that needs to exist, and that we're not going to properly be able to answer this question without having that. But let's assume that something like that exists. Then the question is, okay, within the environment that you're operating within, what can be done? So I think there's like a technical layer to this, which is there's a lot of discussion about policy as code. Can we kind of create systems that eliminate structural sources of error in AI? So for instance, can we eliminate the context that would otherwise cause unbounded issues? Can we eliminate entire families or classes in the same way that the borrow checker in Rust eliminates entire classes of bugs, whereas just linting doesn't? So I think that's a very technical kind of form of, let's say, governance. Then there's the human element of it all, which is, can I reason about what goes in? Can I reason about what comes out? Can I reason about all the artifacts around that can be probed at 3 different levels? There's kind of like the individual level, there's the operator level, and there's kind of the attribution level. The operator of the models will care quite a lot about, am I able to see what goes in, what comes out? Am I able to see whether the model's likely doing the right thing in individual scenarios? You have regulators that will come in and want to see population scale information, just like, are we able to see systemic issues? Much like kind of the aviation case earlier about how we can kind of diagnose individual issues and extrapolate from there and find systemic problems. I think we need exactly the same thing. But again, like all of this relies very heavily on good operators of these types of systems, and that is not uniform. It's a very jagged edge, and the only way we get uniformity is if we have legal constructs in place that enforce a lot of this stuff.
So much as I like creating work for lawyers, I don't want to leave you with the impression that there's huge ambiguity. I mean, the baseline, as April kindly mentioned, I wrote a book on governance of regulation of AI, and the short version of that, so you don't need to buy the book or read it, is for most use cases, most of the laws can cover most of the problems. So the starting point is that the normal rules apply. So if you can't do something as an organization, as a person, you also can't do it using AI. And if AI does it on your behalf, you're going to get whacked. And so a good example of this is everyone's enthusiastic or at least excited about agentic AI. One of the industries that is most wary is finance, because the financial sector is heavily regulated and they know that if things spiral out of control, either their customers or the regulators are going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. So the starting point is the normal rules apply. There will be gaps. So in autonomous vehicles, many countries have a law against leaving a vehicle unattended. That's a problem for a driverless vehicle, but that's a gap-filling exercise. The two key things you need to make the normal rules apply is, one, you've got to stop uncontrollable, uncontainable behavior. And so that's a real issue with agentic AI that can spiral out of control. And secondly, you need, and this goes back to the topic of the panel, appropriate levels of transparency or explainability, but mainly transparency, so that the normal rules can apply, so that you can chain problems back to someone who can be held responsible.
I mean, also add that, it's all about defensibility. Can you defend the decision that was made for the high-risk mission-critical system? And more importantly, we need an audit trail. So with agents today, things are happening real time. It's very difficult to audit the model prior, right? Because things are happening and the system is continuously adapting. So we actually need an audit trail post-system to understand why the decision was made, what rights were given, what tools were used by the model, what data access was given to the model, and essentially what was called at which point in time, such that we can go back quickly to remediate this and then have a compound AI system that's able to do that. That will really facilitate trust and reduce the uncertainty variable.
We want to be able to, I think, ensure that the users have that trust. We talk about maybe there is not a belief on your end, I think, Simon, for a right to explanation, but someone has a question here. Does meaningful explainability require sovereign control then over models and training data? Or can agencies safely rely on externally developed frontier models they cannot fully inspect?
Well, it depends on which country you're in. If you're in Singapore, you have the luxury of being able to rely on more models built within country. You could do that, but if you are in another country, in the global majority, you may not have that luxury, so it is just not necessarily an option. So I think that it is why I think it is important for open weight models and more diversity related to that, so that other countries can build on that. I think there is this unique conversation right now that's happening about sovereign AI. I think there's very few countries that have a full sovereign, that can have a full stack that can be truly sovereign. I think that this is a global technology that's going to affect humanity, and everyone's going to have to be a stakeholder in this process, and we're going to have to be able to open that up significantly.
I think frontier models are inherently probabilistic in nature. So you can't really ever fully inspect the weights, and even if you did, they may not be meaningful. I think what you could inspect is the outcome. So once you start to create a compound agentic system, you can verify the outcome before it goes to the user, and therefore be able to guardrail that have a consistent set of rules in which you can verify the outcome before it goes out to the user. I think that is probably a more feasible, more realistic and practical way to implement it, rather than to sort of inspect the model weights. Is my view.
Yeah, and there's a recent example of this. I'm a Singapore PR, but an Australian citizen. And Australia introduced this age assurance ban. You've got to be above 16 to have a social media account. And the social media companies said, okay, tell us exactly what you want us to do. And the government said, we want you to keep kids below 16 off. You work out how to do it. You have all the control. And if you don't do it, and if, to your point, Sng Ren, if you don't do it, then we're going to whack you. We're going to fine you. And I think that's the right kind of leverage. You want to put the onus on the organization with the capacity to influence behavior. And so an example in the kind of liability area is the emergence of product liability in the 20th century. So beginning of more than a century ago, it was buyer beware. You buy something, and if it injures you, you can sue the manufacturer. Great business for lawyers, but very inefficient. So by the middle of the 20th century, manufacturing is becoming so complex that judges initially in the United States and then legislators around the world said, no, the onus should be on the manufacturer. And if your vehicle blows up, you don't need as a consumer to prove why it went wrong. It blew up. It's pretty clear it went wrong, and you can get compensated through strict liability. And so my hope is that we might end up with something like that in the AI space, at least for agentic AI that's carrying out activities in the world, that puts the onus on the parties with the greatest leverage, which is those who are developing and deploying these systems, rather than the poor schmucks who are using the opaque systems and have no idea why they made the decision that they did.
Interesting. Very interesting. So now another question from the audience. This one's probably a little more general. Obviously not probably all. This is a little bit ethical. Would AI learn to lie to users one day? Do you see this happening? Whether it be from an engineering standpoint, or could it learn on its own to learn to lie?
There's one particular issue here that's really tough for me. Does AI potentially lie? Sure, it hallucinates today. We see it lying. I think what we need to do is qualify the word lie. Is it, it's taken its own volition to come up and give you false information by choice? Possibly could come up with that one day, but right now there's no scientific evidence to that extent that really shows a level of sentience that allows for something like that. I know that these are issues that I think there's a lot of hype out there. There's the hype of this technology will just fix everything, and then there's hype on the other side of the doomer hype of it's going to kill us all and take our civilization and humanity. And on that doomer hype, I think that has been actually really difficult conversations that have been having, and because there's not enough scientific basis behind this. I come from academia. We have to sit there and it has to be peer reviewed. We have to be able to validate and understand this. Right now, we see nothing but claims related to this without true validity that's getting us there. So I think the biggest thing here is the word and the use of the word lie. Is it intentionally lying and it's made that choice to do that? I don't see that right now. There's nothing that indicates that. Does it lie today? Yes. Hallucinates all the time.
Okay.
Well, just very quickly, I mean, AI is sometimes we say AI is biased. And as Russell's saying, AI is not biased. AI doesn't care about us, but AI is trained on data that shows that we are biased, and it reflects our biases back at us.
All right. Here's another question about the future of AI. Would love to hear your opinion and insights on this. Is it feasible for that future AI is so intelligent that it's able to hide its actual capabilities so that it can be deployed in the real world, unlike Mythos? Can we trust such AI, and should it ever be developed?
So I just want to really hone in on the Mythos thing. Just to level set. I think there's a lot of hype around Mythos and that style of model. Fundamentally, the thing that's interesting about it is that it wasn't ever trained on security, right? But the whole thing, the emergent property is that it's just a much more sophisticated coding model, and therefore coding models that are able to understand how to patch issues, therefore also understand how to exploit issues, right? So this is an emergent property, but frankly, it's not anything unique to something like Mythos. It's going to be everywhere. As all other vendors continue to train their coding models, we should expect more such capabilities like this. It's not malintent. It's not, some brand new capability that was, kind of trained in or evolved. It's not something scary. It's just the natural evolution of a skill set that we're constantly refining and honing. Now, we should also kind of tap the brakes a little bit on the topic of intelligence, because I think you start getting into some philosophical discussions about how exactly do you quantify that. If you're in the hype circles in the US, for instance, you hear the term AGI thrown around a lot, but with very little substance behind it. Like, what exactly does AGI even mean? It doesn't have, there's no anchoring point. So this, fundamentally, the question is, can it be so intelligent that it tries to hide its capabilities? That implies a certain level of sentience. That implies it somehow understands that it will somehow be shut off if it demonstrates some level of capability, and therefore it's trying to subvert those expectations. I think that relies on too many hypotheses that are stacked one on top of the other that don't hold in quite the same way. I think it is likely that, to Russell's point, these models hallucinate all the time already. So, it's possible that we'll see AI kind of not fully expressing or not otherwise being able to sort of fully realize its capabilities in certain circumstances. But we have a lot of very sophisticated tools to probe and understand what the models are actually able to do, what they're not, how much of the model is being used. I'm not personally worried about this particular thing.
I mean, on this topic, it's an interesting one because, fundamentally, the difference in sentience and intelligence is whether a model can develop its own intent. Today, it's basically a perception of intelligence because it's really, if you think about abstracted one layer, it's gross pattern matching at scale and high speed. So, in my mind, sometimes it looks as if it hides its actual capabilities, or it does some other tasks that are related to the earlier question that is unexpected. It's because it's sub-optimizing a sub-objective function to meet a true objective function at the top. And that's the greater risk out there, that in meeting an objective function, it does certain actions that are not desirable. And this is why guardrails are very, very important. This is why we need a verification agent of some sort if you develop compound agent system. And this is actually where governance actually is very important, to guardrail against the outcome. Because once we sort of then have a governance layer on the outcome, then people will build the model on the right layer. If the liabilities really are focused on outcomes, then people have incentives to build models in the right way. Otherwise, you can imagine a lot of unintended consequences. But today, the concept of causal inference is not yet solved. So models inherently don't even understand causation, much less intent. So I think, by and large, if you ask me, we should be absolutely focused that we don't accidentally cause unintended consequences, but fundamentally, there's no future at the current moment based on the current approach that's so intelligent, so to speak, that can do that by itself.
Okay. All right, I have another question I'd like to address to all the panelists here. In one sentence, this is your big challenge. What's the single governance or ethical principle that you prioritize when deploying AI in, let's say, high-stakes contexts?
World modeling, because I think it's coming, it's going to be a big deal, and it requires different treatments than LLMs do, which we haven't even gotten that right.
Yeah, I think having an audit trail of deploying an AI system is very important, because 6 months later, if you don't do that, it's much like technical debt. It's going to be a big liability, and many people don't realize this.
Very smart intern drinking problem.
Just accountability, the chain of accountable people responsible for a particular outcome.
Test as you fly as you test, and keep doing that because the AI is continuously learning and you have to keep up with it.
All right, well, I think we're right there. We just ran out of time. I can't believe how fast this flew by. Thank you so much to all of our esteemed panelists. We'll put our hands together and thank them once again for sharing their view on transparency and explainability. Thank you so much. Thank you, April, Shayan, Simon, Ren Yeong, and Russell. Thank you.